It's 8 minutes after 10 o'clock on a Friday. You've reached the Real Estate Fix. I'm your host, Rich Sherman, on KHTS 98.1 AM 1220, your hometown station.com. And thank you guys for tuning in today. Today is going to be kind of a different, little bit of a different show. We're going to do just as much market wrap-up stuff. I usually do the first quarter of the show with market stuff, but frankly, that's just getting depressing when talking about the real estate market for 10 minutes every Friday, because I'll give you a market wrap-up right now. The interest rates have gotten over 8%. They're going to stay over 8% for quite some time. The Fed is not going to raise them at the next meeting. The following meeting, they probably will again. And again, the Fed doesn't have a direct correlation, but they have a correlation to the interest rate. Personally, I think the Fed is not going to rest until the interest rate gets over 8.5%, certainly 8.25%, and the housing market starts to cool. Housing prices are still too high. When the Fed talks about crushing inflation, you can substitute the word inflation for housing, because that is where they're seeing most of it. That is where they want to knock down most of it. And I get it. I mean, in the last 3 years in Santa Clarita, our average sales price has gone up by 27%. That is not sustainable. Now, when we had interest rates of, 2 and 3%, maybe, but with interest rates at 7, 8, and now approaching over 8, that is just not a sustainable situation. I mean, mortgage prices, your average mortgage in Santa Clarita right now is 3 times what it was a year and a half ago. And that is not sustainable. So that is the market wrap. So the rest of the show, now that we've gotten through that, the rest of the show today is going to be all things rental. We're going to talk about renter stuff for landlords, which we now call property providers. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. Property renters, all the good stuff you need to know, some fun statistics. And I have a special guest joining us today. I asked my lovely wife and real estate attorney extraordinaire, Jane Szerman, to join us, because in addition to being better looking than I am, she is also the brains of the operation. And I think it's good to have an actual attorney talk to you guys, since a lot of you guys get excited about the fact that I am not an attorney. And the fact that I'm married to one doesn't seem to get me any traction. So I thought I'd have her come in today and answer some rental questions. So thank you for coming in.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Jane is, for those of you who don't know already, Jane is... she has her undergrad from Chico. She did her graduate work at Santa Clara University. She has her MBA and her law degree both from Santa Clara. Passed her bar exam on the first try and has been a practicing real estate attorney for a while.
Little while.
I'll just
we don't
leave
need to
it
be
for a
specific about
while.
the number.
I'm happy to tell you guys how old I am, but I'll keep her age a secret. But it's been a while. So before we get into, let's get into rental stuff. And before we get into it too much, I want to read this, because there are going to be some things we have to talk about today. And I want to read this in general. The first thing I want to discuss is this idea that the state of California has that renting is a permanent status. Now, we all know that there are those people who will go through their entire lives always being renters, but that's not the idea. The ownership society that we were supposedly building in the United States after World War II, and we've done it pretty successfully, is called an ownership society. When they say ownership, they don't mean ownership of other stuff, they mean ownership of real estate. That's what we're supposed to be. The idea is you rent until you can own. The idea is to climb that ladder, you get into owning a property. That's why there's so much money to be made in property. That's why the government provides such a massive tax benefit for owning property, or at least for the mortgage tax deduction for property. Everything in this country is really kind of, it's economic theory anyway, is to get people to own. Because as it turns out, when people own things, when people own real estate, they tend not to foment coups and things of that nature. It tends to lead to a very stable government. And there was some question about that coming out of World War II. Now we think it's, well, last couple of years maybe notwithstanding, we think it's kind of crazy to think of the government as ever being unstable. Incompetent, slow, difficult, sure, but not unstable. So you're not supposed to rent forever. That's my basic operating thesis. And the state and I have a different opinion on that, because the state of California thinks you're supposed to rent forever. Now, as evidence that I think renting is a bad idea in general, I think most people would agree with me, there is a fascinating study. Now, it's a study that was done by Australian researchers studying British data. So this is Australians studying Britain, but I still think it applies to us. And the headline was just fascinating. It was fantastic. So from Forbes last week, renting a home ages you faster than smoking or unemployment. I'm going to say that again. Renting a home ages you faster than smoking or unemployment. People who rent their homes as opposed to owning outright age faster than those experiencing unemployment or who've previously smoked, according to a new study by Australian researchers that looked at the stress of renting in British adults. The stress of renting includes factors like having not having the money to pay rent, being exposed to environmental hazards at a rental property, the hassle of moving, and the stigma of renting causes biological aging at a rate of 100% more than unemployment and 50% more than smoking. The researchers found, and has a, quote, real and significant consequence for health. In other words, if you rent your entire life, statistics tell us you will have a shorter lifespan. If you live in poverty, you're going to have a shorter lifespan. It's not fair, it's not right, but it is what the data tells us, and we're foolish to ignore it. Past research has found that physical conditions of housing, like overcrowding or inadequate heating, had an obvious impact, but there are also non-tangible factors that impact health, like relative affordability and security, according to the study published in the British Medical Journal's Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health. Not sure how it winds up in a Journal of Epidemiology, but okay. And one last thing, an April study published by the Journal of the American Medical Association said poverty is the fourth leading risk factor of death among Americans, behind heart disease, cancer, and smoking. So it's heart disease, cancer, smoking, and poverty. Those are the four biggest killers in the United States. Which one of these is not like the other? Three of those are physical problems. One of them is a habitual problem, is a habit problem. And the other is poverty. So nearly 300 people died of risk factors associated with 10 or more years of cumulative poverty in 2019, researchers found. And even experiencing poverty for a single year increases the mortality risk more than strokes, Alzheimer's disease, or diabetes. So yeah, renting is not meant to be a permanent state of being. And this attitude that California now has, that it is a permanent state of being, and because it's a permanent state of being, they are hair on fire to try and curb what they feel are landlord abuses. And I appreciate their point of view. So we've all heard stories about landlord abuses, but here's the thing. Not all landlords wear a giant stovepipe hat and have a waxed mustache that they twirl as they rip off tenants. I'm not saying those people out there don't exist. I'm saying they are in the minority. They are not the majority. And it's gotten ridiculous out there. It's bad enough that rents are what they are, but what the state is doing is frankly making it worse. Let's start here. In the state of California in 1994, I think was the last time we had something on the ballot about this, we voted that we do not want rent control. California as a state does not want rent control. Now, pay attention because it's coming back again. It's going to be on the ballot this next time around, rent control again. Now, granted, in 1994, rents weren't quite as out of control as they are now, and I certainly understand the desire for that. But the way this is manifesting, the way the state has chosen to do this, is completely and utterly ridiculous. I'm going to ask Jane to help comment with this a little bit because we were talking about this morning. It seems to me like the state of California has set up a dynamic where we don't want rent control. We all agreed on that. We all agreed that's not what we want to do. Is we voted in 1994, don't want to do that. Now, maybe attitudes have changed, but as we were talking about this morning, it's like every single municipality, whether it's Santa Monica or Pasadena, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, they all are sort of nibbling at the edges of that.
Yeah, they're not just nibbling at it. They're pushing right up to the edge in terms of rent control, because you can't, and thank goodness it's there though, because it does keep the bulk of the rent control rules from applying to most single individual homeowners.
Sure.
Single family homes and condos for the most part are exempted from most of these regulations, but I see this as a very slippery slope that that's the next to go.
Well, that's exactly the concern, because when you have some of these rental regulations that have been foisted upon us, because I think in this case, we have a problem with homelessness in the state. We have more homeless in Los Angeles County than I think any place in the United States per capita, and it's a problem. It's absolutely true. It's a true problem. It is. But the way to curb homelessness is not to have the state push that responsibility onto the landlord. That's completely and utterly ridiculous. Just the very, very basis of that is, in my view, kind of un-American. Now, I'm not saying that the market should just be completely free fall and whatever you can get for a house to rent, you should be able to get for a house to rent. I understand where there need to be controls, and the controls make sense. I mean, I think right now, what is it? It's you can't raise it more than, again, you're exempt if you're a single family home, but in general, you can't raise the rent more than 10%, I think is the same.
Yeah, you're capped at 10%.
Yeah, for most of the state.
For 12 months.
So I understand that. So you have so you have somebody who moves in at, $3,000 a month. You can't make it 30, maximum you can make it the next time around on the lease is $3,300 a month. I get that. I understand that. But what the state is doing has gotten so ridiculous and has taken up so much bandwidth on this topic. And it's very popular for city councils to do this, but it's just bad policy, and it's absolutely going to blow up in our faces. So before we get into some of the policy stuff that I want to go over with you guys, I want a couple of statistics you should know. Nationwide, 74.4% of rentals are owned by individuals. So that means most rentals are owned by individual people, not by corporations, not by companies, not by massive real estate holdings, not by trusts, individuals, 74.4%. Now in California, that number is a lot lower because property is more expensive here. There's a lot more profit to be made here, so you get a lot more corporate involvement. But in California, still 41 to 52% of all rental property are owned by individuals. 41 to 52%. So that means in any given area, the odds are 50-50 that whatever property you're going to rent, may not be a company, it may be a person. So when we get into some of these rules, understand that they are being used on individuals as well. I know they describe individuals, and the state looks at an individual different than a company as far as how many units you own, and that's kind of how they differentiate it, if I'm not mistaken. You would correct me on that?
Yeah, for the most part, it's if you own 4 properties or less, that counts. So if you're an individual and you own 5 properties or 6 properties or more, there are a number of them that do apply to you. So it's one of the things that's very important to keep track of the differences between the different locations.
Yeah, and that's something we're going to talk about as well. It's gotten to the point now in the rental market where the idea that you could buy a second house, turn around and rent it out and do it by yourself, I mean, you can, but the laws in various areas, and the laws are so specific, both the state, the county, and the city that you're in, that we're rapidly approaching the point where it is all but impossible to do it by yourself. Just to rent a house out, you have to hire an attorney, you have to hire an agent, you have to hire somebody to do it for you. And obviously you're an attorney and I'm an agent, so that's not a problem for us. And that's not necessarily a bad thing to happen as far as our career arcs are concerned. But in general, it's not supposed to be that complicated. It's not supposed to work that way.
No, it shouldn't be. And the reality is you not only have to do your due diligence ahead of time, get it all done right, hire a realtor, hopefully, make sure the disclosures are done properly from the beginning. You have to stay up on that because new laws that are passed don't just apply to new tenancies. They apply to existing tenancies and leases across the board. So, you got to be careful that you keep up with it, and you know that you might, as of this year, you needed to give new notices to tenants regarding rent cap. And it specifically, the funny thing is the notices you have to give are to tell the tenant that the property doesn't fall under rent cap and just cause eviction notices. So it's a little bit of in the negative, but if you don't do that, you then can't, you don't get the protections of being outside the rent control laws, unfortunately.
You, in effect, as a landlord, lose a lot of your rights.
Yeah.
Since the pandemic started, what I've seen, we've all seen, is just this ridiculous amount of laws that have been passed, amended, changed. The state is just making it more difficult to be a landlord. The state, in their attempts to protect tenants, everything's about protecting the tenant, and I can appreciate that. But the state's idea that you're going to, again, stop homelessness or curb homelessness by going after individual landlords is obscene. It's completely utter nonsense, and it's not American from my text. So we're going to talk about couple of things. We're coming up on the break, so we're going to talk about a couple of things when we get back, but I'm going to give you guys a couple of things that I want you to pay attention to when we get back from the break. There's a new one that just passed last week, was just signed into law last week, called Assembly Bill 12. AB 12 is what they call it. It was signed on October 11th, and it now limits security deposits for landlords to 1 month's rent. Now, again, it doesn't apply if it's just a single house and you have less than 4, and so you can get a lot of ways you can get out of this, but in general, all deposits are now being limited to the equivalent of 1 month's rent, which is fine if you also approach the other side of the equation. What is the state, the county, or the city? What are they doing about the eviction courts that right now are running 3 to 4 months to get an eviction done? And that's when a tenant stops paying. And if they do not answer the eviction. If they answer the eviction, you're looking at 5 to 6 months. So let me see if I understand this, California. With all due respect to the governor, I understand where this came from, but the idea is landlord can collect 1 month worth of rent, but it may take up to 6 months to evict the tenant. Well, you're going to be awfully careful about the tenants you rent to. Because you can forget, for me, if I were in that position, I would not rent to a tenant who doesn't have other assets. If you have a house in another part of the world and that's an asset, fine. Because if you don't pay me, I can get a judgment, get a lien. Because you cannot collect judgments from tenants. It's almost impossible. There's nothing to go after in most cases. So what they're doing is they're setting up a dynamic where in their attempts, and this is always what happens, in the state's attempt to protect tenants, they're protecting them right out of a rental. Because if I were a landlord and I read AB 12, I'd say, well, I'm not renting to anybody who doesn't have perfect credit and other assets. That's just the way it's going to be, I guess.
Yeah. I've managed property for family. We have had rental property. Sure. Clients have had rental property. And I can tell you, in the past, we've been willing to take people with terrible credit once we had a conversation with them and worked terms out, and there was a second chance involved there, but there was a higher deposit for a reason. So now you're taking that away as a potential. And certainly with homes, the amount of damage that they could do, tenants can do if they're disgruntled and unhappy about the situation, dwarfs any deposit you're going to get that would be equivalent to 1 month.
Well, the average rent in Santa Clarita is about $4,000 now, give or take. So if you have only 1 month worth of deposit, I can do $4,000 worth of damage to a house just by slamming the front door too hard. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. But so we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what's going on with this no-fault eviction nonsense, having to pay people to get out at the end of a lease. And we're going to go over best policies for renters and best policies for what we now call property providers. We're going to discuss that little term when we get back as well, because that irks me. We're going to discuss all that when we get back. Let's take a break. Let's listen to some of our advertisers. Let's hear some of our sponsors. And stay through the break, please, because it's going to get a lot of fun when we get back. I'm going to rant about stuff. You guys are going to love it. It's going to be loads of fun, and Jane's going to keep me calm and correct me where I say things that are wrong. So listen to the break, and we'll be here when you get back. Thanks, guys. Welcome back. You've reached the Real Estate Fix. I'm your host, Rich Sherman, on KHTS 98.1 FM, AM 1220, your hometownstation.com. Thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate it. Today we've been talking about all things rental because we've been seeing a lot of rental issues in our office of late. And I asked Jane, my lovely wife, real estate attorney and brains of the outfit, to please join me today because, well, she's smarter than I am. So I seem smart because I ask her and she answers me, and then I parrot what she says, and then people think I'm smart. So people even think I'm an attorney sometimes, which makes my mom very happy.
Yes, be careful about
but
that.
I'm not an attorney. I'm only married to, I'm going to get cards that just say that. They're just going to say Richard Sherman, realtor, not an attorney, but married to one. Because I seem to say that a lot. Anyway, we were talking about rentals and kind of the stuff that's going on in the state of California and just how ridiculous it's been. And again, California voted, and we likely will again, that we do not like rent control in this state. And I understand there need to be some limits, and that's fine. But what cities have done with rentals is ridiculous. Bad for the tenants. It's bad for the property providers. We used to call them landlords. But now we call them property providers. And before I ask Jane any more questions, let me explain what I've been grousing about with that a little bit. Earlier this year, the California Association of Realtors, a trade union that I belong to, have for over 33 years, I'm very proud to be a member, did something that I think is just dumb. What they did is they decided to stop using the term landlord, which, by the way, I checked on this. The term landlord has been used in the English vernacular for almost 2,000 years, some version thereof. So it is a fairly well-known term, but the CAR, the California Association of Realtors, decided that the term landlord was just too difficult for tenants to deal with. Despite the fact we've been using that term a couple thousand years, some version thereof, landlord is just too much for those delicate tenants out there, because if we call you a landlord, that has a negative connotation, which just crushes every snowflake tenant out in California. And if you call them a landlord, they don't. It's awful. It's stupid. You are what you are. If you own the property and you're renting it, call it a landlord, call it a property provider, call it my Uncle Ted if you want to. I don't care. It doesn't change what the position is. So now we've decided that everyone's going to be a property provider. Now, I don't much care about the vocabulary stuff. I'm not interested in being part of the vocabulary police like they seem to be. But here's my issue. Why would you are all of the other problems fixed in real estate that CAR has the attention, the money, and the ability to change this? Because every single form that we have in California that used to say landlord on it now says property provider. And that we spent 1 second or 1 penny with CAR to make this change, I find offensive.
Yeah.
Because whatever time they spent, whatever money they spent on this piece of nonsense could have been better spent elsewhere. Property providers. So those of you who own property that you rent to people, you used to be a landlord, but as of now, according to CAR, you are a property provider. And again, I don't care what you call it. It is the same thing. You have done absolutely nothing, CAR, to better facilitate communication between property provider and tenants. We'll probably change them tenants to, I don't know, people who live here and pay us money. I don't know. We're probably going to change that shortly too, because that's going to have a negative connotation. I just find it offensive that they spend time with this kind of nonsense that could be better spent elsewhere. So when I say property provider, and I say it snidely, that's what I'm talking about. And I'm going to continue to say it snidely until somebody gives me a decent reason for this that's not tenants or snowflakes and can't handle the term. Because I just don't think that's true. Anyway, property providers. So let's get back to a couple of statistics here, because I think this is important. According to a 2020 American Community Survey, California has the second lowest homeownership rate in the country. The only place that has more rentals per capita than California is New York. And that number is 56%. Only 56% of people own the home they live in. That's 65% in the rest of the country. So 56% ownership in California, which, what does that mean? 44% non-owners. And the rest of the country, that's 65%. Here it's only 56%. Very low home ownership rates here by comparison. In California, 45.5% of homes are occupied by renters. In the rest of the country, that's 36.9%. We have more renters here than other places, with the exception of New York. We have the highest, by the way, that 45.5% amount of renters in California is the highest since it's been since 1970. So that's my lifetime. The highest, we have more renters in California per capita than we have had in my entire lifetime. A lot of that has to do with the interest rate. A lot of that, in my view, has to do with this nonsense idea that the state has, that people have gotten to their heads, that renting is a permanent state of being. It is not a healthy state of being to rent. It is not at the end of the day. I read you guys a study earlier that says it's bad for your life. Anyone who knows anything about economics will tell you are far better off owning in the United States than you are renting. You just are. You don't get to play the equity game. You don't get to write off your mortgage debt, all that good stuff. All of these benefits that are given to you if you don't get into the game. Owning is where it needs to be. Renting is not a permanent state of being. Renting is temporary. Owning is supposed to be permanent. That's the idea. Anyway, renters are growing faster than owners in California. So in other words, that disparity that we've seen, that's the highest it's been since 1970, highest amount of renters in the state since 1970, that number is continuing to go up. And that is the really terrifying number. It's just getting ridiculous. So yeah, renting is not meant to be permanent. That's not a very good idea. You need to become an owner. If you are a renter, work toward becoming an owner. Start setting money aside. Get with a realtor. Get with a mortgage person and start getting those things together. I would recommend you come talk to us. You can reach me at 661-714-1400. We get people all the time who come in who aren't ready yet and they're renting. We have clients who come in who they're renters. They're looking for houses. We get them into a rental property. We get them set up so that hopefully a year or two from now, they can own a house. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes it's sooner, but that's the idea. Get to owning. That's the point. Because that way you can then be a property provider one day. That's kind of the idea. Nobody ever made money by being the renter. You make money by being the landlord. Now, all of that being said, let's talk about some before I rant about some more stuff, let's talk about sort of best policy for renters. Because I know people listening right now are like, I'm a renter, I'm not a landlord. You guys have been talking about another landlord. So let's talk about some of the best policies for renters in California. If you're going to go rent a house in California, there are some things you're going to need. So just be prepared. You're going to need proof of identification. You should have identification such as driver's license, state ID, passport, green card, or other information to confirm your identity and your residency. You're going to need proof of income, 3 months worth of pay stubs or other conforming data, something like that, but 90 days just to show your income. You're going to need a credit report. You better know your credit score. Go to Credit Karma or someplace else because I'm here to tell you, in most rentals, if you have a credit score below 600, they're not going to want to rent you. I've got some clients who will not rent you if your credit score is below 680. That's just kind of that. I don't think you should base it all on credit score, by the way, if you're a landlord, but it is going to become important. Recommendation letters, extremely important. Get recommendation letters from your former landlord. Get recommendation letters from your friends, your family, people who think you're neat. You don't need 50 of them. 2 or 3 will do, but recommendation letters can go a long way. You're going to need a copy of your vehicle registration and proof of insurance. I know that doesn't seem like a thing, but housing insurance and car insurance can sometimes become intertwined if there's a problem. And the landlord's going to want to know. They have a right to know because it could affect their property. Rental history, again, letter from your past landlord. Were you a good tenant? And a good introduction letter. Those are really kind of the things you need to put together a package when you go to make an offer on a property. So yeah, know what you need before you get into a rental in California. You have anything to add? Anything else you think people need to get into
as far as that's more practical stuff, I'd say that's a pretty good synopsis.
Any landlord who doesn't ask you for all this stuff, be a little bit wary of, because they should be asking for all these things. That's one good way to spot a fake rental listing is if they don't ask for these things.
Yeah, they will have a list. Most of the stuff, if I'm not mistaken, and you know more about that, is done online these days. Don't tenants mostly fill out these applications online?
What you're going to do with most of the time when you're a tenant looking to get into a place is you're going to go usually to some place like we use Rent Spree. The Board of Realtors recommends a great company called Rent Spree. They're really good. You pay them $38 for an adult. $38 per adult, that is, which is lower. I think you can go up to $54 if I remember, but $38 per adult. And then what happens is you put all your information, it spits out a report. It's got everything. It's got the background search. It's got the credit. It's got the whole bit. You can get a more thorough background search if you need it, but most landlords don't. And then it's done. And you can take that same report to anyone you're going to make an offer with. So if you're doing it with house A, that's fine. You can take the same report to house B, C, D, and E. And we do that. We set those up for people all the time. So you got to be prepared to do that sort of thing. And you got to be prepared as a tenant more than anything else to, let the landlord know where you're at. You got to be able to provide this data for them. So number 2, good advice for renters. Know the rental market in the area you're considering. Look at the various internet-based rental listings such as Zillow, Realtor.com, Apartment.com. There are 1,000 of them out there. And know the rental areas you're considering. Know whether it's the rental you're looking at is competitively priced or it's overpriced, because that will affect how you go after this. If somebody's asking for $4,000 a month for a rental, well, if the average rate is $5,000, you're not going to deal on that. You got yourself a deal at $4,000. That's great. If they're asking $4,000 a month and the average going rate is $3,000, well, then there might be some room to move on that. So, but know what you're doing when you get into that. It's not hard to gather this data. And if you're working with an agent, we always provide the data like that.
I was going to say, this is another reason working with a realtor
you're always better off. As a tenant, you are always better off. Now, granted, I'm honest in this because I am a realtor, but you're always better off working with a realtor. We have access to stuff that tenants don't typically have access to on their own. We can put together these reports and stuff for you, help you walk you through the process. And more than that, you have an advocate going forward, so you're much more likely to get the property. They'll have a bunch of offers on any property. If it's a decent rental in Santa Clarita, for sure, any place in Southern California, they're going to have offers on it. So you want to be able to put your best foot forward. And I will tell you, as a landlord, I like it when people have representation. I much prefer that because people who are professional have representation. People who are amateurs don't. And you want to appear as a professional. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't pay for it usually. Oh, that's another issue for another time. Next issue, be prepared to pay for a background and credit check as part of the application. That's what we were just talking about. The maximum set by law in the state of California, which is based on CPI, is right now $52.46. That's the most you're allowed to pay for an application. So by the way,
per person though.
Per person, yes, per adult, per person over 18. So by the way, when you run onto some sort of rental and they say you have to give them $100 to run a background check, that is illegal. You are not allowed to charge more than $52.46. And I would submit most reputable companies are going to be under $40, certainly under 50. So like I said, rent spree's 38. But so if you come across somebody and they want more than $52.46, that's not somebody who's credible. That is illegal. And their whole, I've seen companies use the application process when they get a house that's really hot and it's underpriced and people like it and it photographs well. They'll use the application process as a profit center.
Yeah.
Which you're not allowed to do. You're only going to rent the house to one person. That's it. So if it's a family, maybe they have 2 or 3 applications. You don't need to take 10, 15, 20 applications so you can pay your mortgage payment in order to set up a rental. So be very careful with that, tenants, or future tenants, because nobody should be charging you more than right now $52.46 for an application. Right, and this is the big one, and this is what I'm going to ask you about. And this just seems so obvious to me, and I can't believe it's number 4 on our list because it probably should have been number 1. Read any potential lease carefully.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really sure what else to add there. That's to me seems very obvious. I think the problem is a lot of times people are excited about a new place. They may get along very well with their landlord, and everybody's happy. Nice people. And it seems awesome, and it is awesome. But I would propose to you that no matter how much you love your landlord, I don't care if it's your mother. You put everything in writing in a lease. It's either in a lease or an addendum to a lease, an addition, and you go over it. It has nothing to do with not trusting people. It has everything to do with getting your entire agreement down so there are no misunderstandings, misremembrances, anything like that.
Well, yeah, and the more things
down on the drama, and I'm a big fan of cutting down on the drama.
The more stuff you have in writing, the better off you are for both parties. And leases in California now, just in the last couple of years, have grown. The average lease done through CAR, done through the Board of Realtors by a realtor, where there's stuff you have to use, it's mandatory, which there's a reason for. They're good leases. The average lease used to be about 8 or 9 pages. Now we're up to 18.
And again, a realtor, again, we're back to that same issue. A realtor can't give legal advice, so be cautious. But that there is a little bit of, I know the bar and CAR probably wouldn't be happy, but the reality is there's a little overlap there because realtors work extensively with the contracts created by CAR. So they're very familiar with them. They're not going to give you legal advice and shouldn't, but they can explain them. They can tell you what they mean. They deal with these clauses all the time. And if you have anything, if you need additional information or questions answered, that's where a real estate attorney is going to come in, and you can call Rich. He probably knows the answer. And if not, he can ask me. So, but ask somebody, not just your neighbor, not just your aunt,
I will,
unless she's a realtor.
I will direct you to a real estate attorney. Is what I'm told I have to say, because that's what we do. Also, for those of you who are listening, if you heard me chuckle when she said, I don't care if it's your mother, let me just let you know a little inside baseball thing. She chose that particular description, I think, because we rented to my mom. And she doesn't listen, so I'm not worried about it. But my mom was not the ideal tenant. I've seen worse. There's certainly been worse. But you know how, like, those of you, if your mom gets to a certain age and they call you up and they want you to do stuff around the house and you're usually busy or this, that, you're trying to fit it in. Yeah, imagine what that's like when you're the landlord and they want you to do stuff around the house.
You have no excuses.
You haven't lived until your mom says, I wanted you to come over to fix that light bulb. And since you haven't done it, I'm thinking of filing a grievance with the housing board. So I love my mother, and she's fantastic, and I'd be happy to rent to her again. Not that she needs to. She was between houses at the time for about a year. But yeah, even in her case, and it alleviated any problems. We had a very, very thorough lease, and you should do that as well. So, and obviously, just if you sign anything, read it. And what I would suggest is just same thing. Just if you have a lease, it's not a big deal. Find somebody to read it over for you, even if it's only a second set of eyes. If you really want to be smart about it, go hire an attorney and have them look at it for you. But always read through the lease and ask questions. You're allowed. Ask questions.
Yeah.
Next one up, conduct a property inspection. Sounds super easy as well. I would advise you hire a licensed inspector. Spend the $300, have them do an inspection. I would also tell landlords you should do that because then you have a baseline to go from. When they say something broke and you can prove that didn't, you have a disinterested third party who issued a report. He said, no, the stove was working. I think property inspections are incredibly important. Having said that, most tenants, especially if they come with a lot of money to move into the house, aren't keen on spending another $300, $400, $500 on a property inspection. But you can inspect it yourself. Just check stuff. Make sure the toilets flush properly. Make sure the plumbing works okay. Plug things in. Make sure they work. Do basic stuff.
That's one of the things to make sure the landlord is staying on top of. There is a move-in inspection where you are to go through the property room by room with the manager, the landlord, or a representative, and then before you move out, you go through the property again with the landlord or the manager to document the condition of the property and also to get notice if there's anything that would be deducted from your deposit as a repair to give you an opportunity to fix it prior to the move. So that's another thing to stay up on and know your rights so that you get that properly documented and the owner or manager signs it so that everybody is clear on the agreed condition when you move in and then when you move out.
Yeah, there's a great form that CAR provides called a move-in, move-out form, the MIMO. And it's fantastic. You check little boxes, you write stuff in it. It makes it fairly idiot-proof, which I very much appreciate. So it makes it better for all of us. So thank you, CAR, for that. What else? Know the applicable laws in your area. Easy. Do a Google search. Again, talk to an attorney, all sorts of stuff. And renter's insurance. When you're a renter, you need to carry insurance. The homeowner's insurance is not typically going to carry if you have a friend over to barbecue and they fall down and break their leg. You may have a claim against the landlord's insurance, but more than likely you won't. And it certainly isn't going to cover the, like if the house burns down and your television. It's not going to cover your private belongings.
Yeah, your contents will not be covered.
Get renter's policy. Also, as a landlord, speaking from my landlord perspective, when I have a tenant who makes an application to rent a property and they tell me they have renter's insurance already, great. This is a professional. They know what they're doing. They know what we need. It's much, much better. So that's a little bit of advice for renters. I don't want to make it all landlord specific today. So there's some stuff for renters. And I tell you what, let's go to break a little bit early. We'll hear from some of our sponsors. Drew a blank there, sorry. And when we come back, we're going to talk about no-fault evictions and some of the craziness that's going on in Pasadena because this is important. So even if you've zoned out the rest of the show, please come back and listen to this part because this is going to be good because I am very, very angry about this. I'm unbelievably fired up about this. It's frankly the reason I had Jane in so that I promise I won't curse on the air. Although you never know, I might. So this might be the day. So you might want to listen for that. So please listen through the ads and come back when we're back. And you never know, I may very well curse on the air today. Thank you guys for listening. Hi guys, thank you guys for tuning in. You've reached the Real Estate Fix with Rich. I'm your host, KHTS 98.1 AM 1220, your hometown station. And for those of you who listen to the rest of the show, thank you. I did promise that I may curse after the break there. I promise I won't. I would never disrespect the station that way or the listeners. But it's going to be hard to get through this without doing that. It's one of the reasons Jane is here joining us today because she is my wife. She is a real estate attorney of some renown. And she keeps me on track. And she's sitting close enough to hit me or kick me if I start to get out of she's moving closer so she can kick me. I should have worn shin guards. Anyway, what I want to talk about is this ridiculous thing that's going on in California. And it's not being done by the state. It's being done by individual municipalities. Remember we talked earlier, we said the state of California, we voted, we don't want to have rent controls here. And yet every time I turn around, there's another city, whether it's Santa Monica, whether it's Los Angeles proper, and the latest is Pasadena to get into this. And so I'm going to tell you what's going on in Pasadena just as an exemplar. We do not have this in Santa Clarita, and God willing, we never will. But this is what's going on right now. There's things called these no-fault evictions. And you want to explain what a no-fault eviction is? Since you're the one with the
Well, the idea being you can't evict a tenant for any reason at the end of their lease or, well, I shouldn't say for any reason, for any, for non-payment of rent,
unless
if they're destroying the
fault.
Property, right. If they're not at fault, you can't evict them at the end of their lease or to move back in is limited or for other reasons.
So here's the basic idea. Because California has done an abysmal job of combating homelessness in this state, because Los Angeles as a city has done an even more abysmal job combating homelessness in this area, they've decided to push that onto the individual landlords, both companies and individuals. Now, there are exemptions if you only own one house, but I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about this as we get through it, because I find it obscene. So here's the idea. I rent a house to you, and I'm not your landlord, I'm your property provider now. So I'm your property provider, I rent a house to you. We sign a 1-year lease. At the end of that year, your lease is up. Kindly move. We're done. We had a contract. I fulfilled my part. You fulfilled your part. You're done. But you don't want to leave. So you keep paying the same rent. And I go, no. Your lease is up. And I know it automatically transfers to month if you don't leave. And that's fine. But I am the owner of the property. I have fulfilled the terms of your lease. And I would kindly like you to move out. Not because you broke the house. Not because you owe me money. I would just like you to move out because I would like my home back. Let's say I would like to move in. Let's go one further. I'll tell you a story from the office recently. I had a client who called me up because she was interested in another property. She and her family own 6 houses, and they made the mistake of keeping them all in the same name. Her mother is in her 90s. She's dying. She wanted to go home and die. Now, when she said go home and die, what she was talking about is the house that they lived in for 40 years, the house she raised 4 kids in. That is where she wanted to do her hospice, and that is where she wanted to die. And that should have worked out fine because the tenant in that house, their lease was up. The family went to them and said, we would like you to move out because my mom would like to move back in. And they said, no, we're not moving out because there's this new no-fault eviction standard in Los Angeles that says if you're going to move me out, even though I've done nothing wrong and you've done nothing wrong, it's just your house, you have to pay me. So in that case, so that her mother could go home and die in peace in her own home to move back into the house, they had to cut a check for $27,000. Didn't do anything wrong. Wasn't breaking a lease. The lease was up. And they still had to cut a check. Pasadena is the latest to get into this. In Pasadena, 50% of all households are renters, and there's this ridiculous idea coming out of a guy named Ryan Bell, who's the most current offender. Ryan Bell, chair of the Pasadena Rental Housing Board, voted that these fees are acceptable, and here's his thinking. Bell added that Pasadena's relocation fees are, quote, in line with other cities in the region, as if that's a meter. Specifically, nothing that Santa Monica's program provides, just over $37,000 to displace tenants in similar circumstances. Pasadena is now $37,000 at $500. I guess they wanted to be number one. And here's the quote that just fried me from this guy, Ryan Bell. We're trying to help people, this is his quote, we're trying to just help people relocate, be able to afford to live in the community when they're displaced due to a decision they didn't make. They didn't do anything wrong. The goal is for folks to want to stay in Pasadena. They should be able to do that. So here's what I'm doing. I don't know if I told you this. Next week, I'm moving into Brentwood. I'm going to find the cheapest place in Brentwood. I'm going to move in. And then my theory is going to be, along with Mr. Bell, that, I would like to live in the Brentwood community. And I feel Brentwood should rally around, just like they have to do in Pasadena, to keep me there. Because apparently the community owes me something because I live there. The fact that I can't afford to be there because of stuff in my life over where I got there is no longer it's not my problem anymore. It is now the landlord's problem. Sorry, it is now the property provider's problem. It is now the city of Bel Air's problem. In this case, the city of Pasadena or Santa Monica or some of these others. The idea that at the end of a lease, that the owner of a property should pay a tenant to vacate, I find obscene. I find that completely and utterly ridiculous. If you're breaking a lease, hey, you sign a 5-year lease with somebody and you need them out early, you should have to pay for that. That's reasonable. And I'm not against all rental restrictions. I understand you shouldn't have to be able to increase the price ridiculously. It shouldn't all just be market. Otherwise, the things get out of hand. I understand. But this clearly is a step too far. This is nonsense. I would sooner die than pay a tenant to move out of my house.
Sounds crazy to me.
That is totally and completely insane. And $37,500? I should pay you $37,000 to move out of my house at the end of a lease?
Well, that's the problem. These rules are written and by cities that are not the ones taking the financial responsibility for it. They've got phrases such as the tenant didn't do anything wrong and we're giving financial assistance for relocation. And that all sounds great, except that the city isn't the one paying for it. They're putting it off on individual property providers. And it's not them so if the city was paying for it or the government in some way, which is a whole different question, that would be one thing. But they are saying you, individual private citizen, you pay for that other individual private citizen to have housing indefinitely wherever they want it.
Because we here at the city have not done our jobs. We here at the county have not done our jobs. We here at the state have not done our jobs. We here as a country have not done our job. So you property owner get to deal with this. Now, I want to go over this. There are exemptions. If you have 4 homes or fewer as rental properties, you're exempt from this. Also applies to condos and things. So there are a lot of exemptions for individual, what they call mom and pop owners, which is, again, about 50% of the rental market.
That's the only thing that's keeping this from completely blowing up the rental market.
But I'm here to tell you, that's going to go away at some point as well. That is my fear.
Yeah, I feel like that's at risk.
Because, this woman I was telling you.
Because that's the thinking. The thinking is financial assistance to the renters and to allow people to stay there and to give them money to move. And that that has nowhere to go but cost us more money.
Yeah, it's just not right. It's bad for the tenant as well because now you put yourself in a position where if you're a landlord, you got to be a whole lot more careful about who your tenant's going to be.
Absolutely.
Because my goodness, this could be a mess. This is, again, I find most government intervention are good ideas badly implemented. And this is yet another example that proves my theory. Good idea to keep people in houses. Good idea to keep rents stable. Good idea to not let landlords just go completely nuts. I get that. But this is badly implemented. Because now you're taking people, in the case of Pasadena, and they're almost proud of the fact that they have the highest fees now. They went $500 higher than Santa Monica, so they could be number one, I guess. And I get why this is popular inside city council meetings, but it's devastating for the economy. It's bad for real estate, and it's just wrong-headed. We do not do things like this in this country. We don't do things like this in this country for a reason. It's not just democracy is a political thought. Democracy is an economic thought as well. Democracy is an economic theory as well. And anything you do to delegitimize democracy in the economy is bad for the economy. And this is, oh my God. So now, because of Assembly Bill 12 signed last week, landlords can't collect more than 1 month worth of rent, unless you're one of the exempted categories, which most of you are, I hope.
That one, by the way, remember, is only 2 properties and not 4 properties as the maximum. So it's actually a different standard. So if you own 3, that bill does apply to you, whereas these other ones don't, because you don't own more than 4.
This is beginning to sound like a
fun.
Monty Python sketch or a Saturday Night Live sketch. It's just nonsense. So thank you for clarifying.
Benny Hill,
she's running around. And in Pasadena and in Santa Monica and in LA proper and all these other places, not Santa Clarita, you may have to pay at the end of a lease to move back into your own home. I just can't get wrapped my head around that. To move back into my home, if I'm the property provider, and the tenant's lease is up, done, finished, fulfilled the term, we're good, and we still give you 90 days, could give you 6 months, give you a year. Notice, doesn't matter. Still might have to pay them a tremendous amount of money in relocation, because again, these delicate tenants who are all snowflakes, according to the state of California, can't possibly handle relocating on their own, no matter how much notice that they're given. Landlord has to pay for that. That is obscene. That is wrong. That is obscene. It is silly. I don't know about you guys listening, but I have had enough, and I think most people who are tenants would agree with me, as certainly landlords would. Oh, sorry, property providers would. That this is just a step too far. This is ridiculous. This is a huge disincentive for people becoming a landlord. This is a huge disincentive for renting to people. This is a huge disincentive for an industry that is already overburdened. There are not enough rental properties available. Because there are not enough rental properties available, that's why the prices are as high as they are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You do not cure a supply and demand problem by increasing demand and retarding supply. That is not going to do it. And frankly, if the state of California or the county of Los Angeles or the city of Pasadena or Palmdale or Santa Monica or any place else wants to become the property provider's business partner, that would be one thing. But when you approach something like this with nothing but stick and no carrot, you're going to get a backlash. You just are. This is a very, very bad, dangerous, and in my view, wrong-headed idea. And I don't know how you get them to stop doing this, because the city councils tend to vote for, there's one person that abstains and everybody else thinks it's great. And it's not. And tenants don't necessarily understand this. This is bad for tenants as well. This guarantees you higher rents. Guarantees it, because you push more liability onto the property owners. Because of that, this is going to make rents higher. This is going to make it harder to rent. This is going to create more homelessness, not less. This is just wrong-headed and frankly dumb. But that's just my opinion on the subject. I might be wrong. I see we're coming to the end of the show. Jane, I want to thank you coming in for joining us and keeping me calm, and I didn't curse on the air or anything.
That went well.
So those of you who are waiting for me to curse on the air, I am terribly sorry to have disappointed you this time around. But tune in next week. You never know. I'm not that bright. I might get angry about something and slip. You never know. Well, I don't think so. Let's hope not. But anyway, thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it. I'm Rich. This has been The Real Estate Fix with Rich Sherman. This is my lovely wife, Jane, real estate attorney extraordinaire. If you have any questions of me or of Jane, give me a call. I'm at 661-714-1400. Thank you guys. Have a great week. Be good humans. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.